navigate this new type of environment, or this increasingly complex environment that we find ourselves living in. And yeah, and I think it will help the people in our organizations thrive, and help our organizations thrive, if they become better at sense making in a increasingly complex and ambiguous world.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and if he wrote this stuff, I mean, he came up with these theories, if I remember correctly, in the 60s, right? So these aren't necessarily a response of recent calamities that have
No.
occurred in our societies. And he has, and he's identified something, he's framing this, and maybe other people have as well, this stage in our, in the, organizational arena as the post-industrial organization, which I don't know the specifics of what a pre-industrial, although in my head I can probably kind of assume what a pre-industrial organization was. But it's he coined this probably in the 60s, so everything was post in the
Well, yeah,
60s,
I
right?
mean, you have these industrial organizations starting to rise in the late 1900s, with corporations and bigger, more complex business models. And I could see him even in the 60s, and I'm once again, uh, well, I'm kind of projecting this onto him, so I can't say that he's actually written this, but I could see a lot of theorists in organizational theory and leadership being able to predict that organizations were just going to get more complex as time moved on into the 21st century. I know with transformational leadership theory, for instance, one of the reasons that was cultivated was because people we're seeing that things were only growing more complex, and that when you kind of project that out into the 21st century, you can see more complexity emerging. And I don't see that train stopping. I think the world is just going to get more and more complex, and we've got to learn how to navigate that complexity.
Yeah, and I think it's probably important to sort of understand like the what we're meaning by complex in certain ways. And there's a lot of discussion one can have on that. In this particular conversation, again for Carl Weick, I believe that's how we pronounce it, Weick.
Like Vike.
And you already kind of mentioned this this is typified. This post-industrial organization is typified through that where the classic causal relationships become increasingly less clear, which is really interesting.
Yes.
And leadership structures become increasingly less relevant, which is also very interesting. Which then either that those states either create or are responses to a constant state of uncertainty. And so and I think again, I think we in modern sort of information field, at the very least, can attest to that sort of uncertainty layer that's always sort of there now these days. And so what Vike is saying is like, let's acknowledge that reality. And so the original thinking of how systems or how organizations were were perceived or what they were supposed to do needs to switch, needs to change. And he sort of states this in some way, So
Yeah, I
uh,
think he's saying like the what we would call a rational system, right? Back in the mid 20th century, where everything was focused on a hierarchy and what's your role within that hierarchy and what's your function and what are the goals that you're supposed to achieve. That's a very rigid structure, and I think with a sense making organization, he's arguing to move away from that structure is ineffective in an increasingly complex world, and you have to create organizations that are more sense making and focused and nimble and able to respond and improvise the responses to a changing environment.
Yeah, and I like the fact that he says he calls post-industrial organizations as rationales for commitment,
Huh,
where
yeah.
things are oriented around the individual's cognitive processes. I thought about that rationales for commitment, and I think as we go deeper in our conversation, it starts to kind of become clear why he says that. But on the surface, it reads like he's saying that as an organization is a commitment to do something, and that you are developing or rationalizing those behaviors to fulfill that commitment.